G'day, I'm Jeremy, the Zoo Nerd, coming to you live from my backyard in beautiful Los Angeles, California. How's everyone doing today? I hope you're well. I hope you're happy and healthy. I hope you're having some fun. Today on our Critter Chat, we are going to talk about kangaroos and wallabies. So we've talked a bit already in previous Critter Chats about koalas and about marsupials in general. I felt it important to talk about kangaroos and wallabies because they represent a huge portion of the marsupial group of animals. Now, marsupials, if you remember, they are pouched mammals, so they have hair, they give live birth, all those good things that mammals do. But with marsupials, the babies are born super underdeveloped. And then they climb into their mom's pouch, where they attach to a nipple and stay in her pouch for a lengthy amount of time until they get a bit bigger. So the babies, when they're grown, are tiny. They don't have hair. Their eyes aren't open. They don't have very well developed. They don't look really like the adult animal at all. As far as shape and size, most of their limbs are not very well developed, other than their what would be arms. They use those quite a bit early on, so they have well developed arms. But today we're going to talk about some of the most iconic animals in Australia, widely recognized for their unique body shape and their hopping locomotion, or the way they move. And some of my favorite animals, to be honest. They are really great animals to work with, and very interesting animals as well. Now, for many people, kangaroos and wallabies may not seem as strange as other Australian animals. Most Australian animals seem very strange and different than a lot of other things. And there's some good similarities between kangaroos and other animals that fulfill that same niche in their habitats around the world. But there's also some things that are pretty different and unique and maybe even weird about them as well. For starters, kangaroos and wallabies, and there's actually a third group called Wallaroos. They are all members of a big family called the macropods. Macro means big, and pod means feet. So they are animals with big feet. Feet on a big kangaroo can be about this long. So yes, they have very big feet. Even the little guys have pretty big feet for their size. So macropod is a good name for them. Now, macropods includes other animals that we're not going to talk about today. I wanted to really focus in on kangaroos and wallabies because I felt that that was enough to talk about without getting into some of the little more unique groups. We'll do another episode about some of them a little bit later on. So for starters, let's talk a little bit about what is the difference between a kangaroo and a wallaby, and where does this random third group fit in called Wallaroos. The biggest difference is size. So kangaroos are pretty good sized. An adult male red kangaroo or eastern gray kangaroo can be as tall as I am and weigh almost as much as I am. So they can be about 6 feet. Some can even be a little taller than that. And they are in that weight range of near 180 pounds or so. So the big males can be huge compared to a lot of the other members of the macropod family. Now the females are quite a bit smaller, measuring in about 4.5 feet tall, typically weighing closer to like the 60-pound range for the kangaroos. So size is the biggest determiner. Kind of if it's shorter than 3 feet tall, it's a wallaby. If it's bigger than like 4.5 feet tall, it's a kangaroo. If it's in between those, it's considered a wallaroo. So there's 4 species of kangaroos, although some people say there's 3. And there are 2 species of wallaroos. Some people say there's 3. So there's a certain species that could be a kangaroo, depending on who you ask. And then there are 30 species of wallabies. So wallabies definitely represent a lot of different species. The 4 species of kangaroos are red kangaroos. Those are typically the heaviest. They live in the middle of Australia, out in the desert, where their red-colored fur kind of helps blend in with the red soil really well. They are also very powerful animals. Like I mentioned, they are the heaviest. Big male red kangaroo can be close to 200 pounds, so big guys. The gray kangaroos, there's 2 species, eastern and western. The eastern ones live kind of along the coastline of eastern Australia. That's where most of the big cities are. Places near Sydney, near Brisbane, near Melbourne. So kind of along that eastern coastline of Australia. The western kangaroos kind of live along the southern end of Australia and a bit up the west side, although not all the way up, not as far north as like Perth. And then the 4th kangaroo, and this is the one that may also be a wallaroo, is called the antilopine kangaroo. And they live at the very north of Australia. And if you remember, Australia's in the southern hemisphere. So north is where it's warmest, south is where it's coldest. So these guys live up in the tropical forest of northern Australia, the antilopine kangaroo or antilopine wallaroo. It's still being decided if they're a kangaroo or if they're a wallaroo. Different people say different things. They're kind of at that height level where they could be kind of either. They're about 4.5 feet tall. So some call them kangaroos, some call them wallaroos. With kangaroos, they typically eat grass. So they are grazers. They have very long, sharp front teeth that are perfect for clipping grass. And they really kind of clip the grass as they go along eating. So they like to live in more open areas or woodlands with a lot of grass growing at the base of the tree. They are typically in kind of a flatter terrain area. So that's why they're perfect for like the eastern side of Australia, along the southern area, and then the red kangaroos out in the middle. So this antilopine kangaroo, they kind of live in the edge of the tropical forest where there's a bit of grass growing underneath the trees. Now the wallaroos, the middle-sized group, they can be about 50 to 100 pounds. They're typically in that 3 to 4.5 feet tall. So they're a little more stocky than a kangaroo, and they're a bit shorter. They usually have a little bit thicker hair because the common wallaroo typically lives along hillsides and mountainous areas. So places in Australia where it would get a little colder. And unlike the kangaroos, they're also a little more solitary. So that means they live kind of more alone. Kangaroos are very social. They usually live in a group of between 20 to 30 individuals. That group is called a mob. A herd is also used to describe a group of kangaroos, but a mob is kind of the more preferred term. Wallaroos tend to be a little more alone. So they're kind of more on their own, meeting up in infrequent visits. So they're a little less social. They also will eat more bushes than just grass. So they're kind of in that middle point. Whereas wallabies, the smaller guys, they tend to be very specialized in unique habitats. So there's different kinds of wallabies, 30 different species. Rock wallabies, bush wallabies, shrub wallabies, there's a swamp wallaby. So they live in all sorts of different habitats, and they can be pretty small. The smallest one's only about a foot tall and weighs about 2 pounds. So it's pretty little. That's called the Burbridge rock wallaby. So they're pretty little guys. Most wallabies that live in rocky areas are very adept at hopping from rock to rock instead of out in the open in like a grassland or forest setting. And they're really good at hopping on rocks. I've worked with some rock wallabies at the LA Zoo, and it was kind of astounding to see how easily they could hop up a rocky, cliffy area. Wallabies tend to be more browsers, so that means they eat bushes and they eat leaves. So their teeth are also a little smaller in the front compared with like the kangaroos, who have longer, sharper teeth in the front for cutting grass. Wallabies' front teeth are shorter, but their molars are better developed for grinding the leaves of the plants that they eat. So kangaroos do this too, but it's really noticed in some wallaby species that they can really lean back onto their tail, and that can support their weight of their body. So their tails on some species are really thick where it adjoins with the backside of the kangaroo, and can almost be like a fifth limb to give them some support. And they will do that especially if they need to fight or defend themselves. They can lean back on their tail and then kick with their big front feet. And a kick from a kangaroo or wallaby or wallaroo is capable of breaking ribs on a human. So it can be a very powerful kick, and they can definitely cause some damage. I don't recommend you approach a wild kangaroo or wallaby for those reasons. Now they can also use their front arms quite a bit to do things. I posted some photos earlier of some kangaroos and wallabies that lived at the Los Angeles Zoo. And if you look at the third photo, it's a mother western gray kangaroo with a joey peeking out of her pouch. And she's holding food in her hands, so they can use their hands to hold things and bring food up to their mouth. They will sometimes, if they're looking to eat like flowers or branches off of bushes, they'll reach up and pull those down with their arms as well. So they do have pretty good dexterity in their hands. Across the board with kangaroos, wallabies, and wallaroos, they all chew their food, swallow it, and then regurgitate it and chew it again. With a lot of hoofed animals we talked about that do that, that's called chewing their cud. So wallabies and kangaroos do that as well. But their stomach isn't as complex as like a cow or a goat or a sheep that has that. They do have some bacteria in there that helps to digest the planting material, but it's not the 4 chambers that goats and sheep and cows have. Let's see, what else did we need to talk about there? Pretty much covers what they eat. So some interesting things that they do, especially in the outback, the middle of Australia, can be really hot. It's a desert in the middle of Australia. So many of them will lick their arms to stay cool as that moisture on the hair evaporates. It kind of works similar to like a swamp cooler, if you've ever used one of those to cool down a house or a vehicle. That is kind of a built-in way for them to keep cool. Most species can live between 10 and 20 years old, so they don't live super long. Even in a zoo setting, that's pretty true, depending on the species. Typically, the ones that live maybe 10 in the wild can live into their early teens, like 12, 13 in a zoo setting. It's kind of rare that any of them will make it to full-on 20 years old, but it is possible and has happened. So let's talk a little bit about a baby kangaroo. So this is the part that's really interesting to me. When the baby is born, it's after a gestation or pregnancy period of 30 days in most species, up to 38 in some, but really short actual pregnancy at a time when the baby is developing inside the mom's body. When they are born, depending on the species, they're usually about the size of a jelly bean or a bumblebee. So they're just itty bitty little babies when they are born. And right after they're born, they have to crawl along their mother's fur to get up to her pouch. So they usually have pretty good developed arms at that point and use those to climb. The mom does not help get them in the pouch at all. So if the baby falls off, oh well. So she doesn't have any sort of help to offer the babies to get into the pouch. It's on the baby's own to get there. Once it gets into the pouch, it attaches to a nipple where the babies typically stay for up to about 6 months. During that time, they develop the rest of their body, so they grow their hair, their eyes open, their ears grow, their hind feet super develop, their tails grow. And then at about 6 months old is when they first start poking out of their mom's pouch. And that's when you can see their little head or sometimes a foot hanging out. And then between 6 months and about 8.5 months, they'll be kind of in and out of the pouch. So they'll start to come out. I've been there on some of those first days when kangaroos at the zoo came out of the mom's pouch for the first time. They're super cute. Their feet are huge, and they don't really know how to use them very well because they've never had to walk or stand. They're pretty wobbly for the first week or so that they're coming in and out of the pouch until they get their footing and figure out how to hop together. Now with kangaroos, wallabies, wallaroos, they have to always hop. So they can't walk backwards, they have to hop. So it's both feet moving at the same time all the time. Despite this, they're actually really good swimmers. That's probably something that they evolved to be doing, to sometimes cross rivers or lakes, or especially in areas of Australia. It's really dry part of the year, and then it's really wet and floods the other part of the year. So they would sometimes need to be able to swim to get out of unsafe conditions. So they are really strong swimmers. Oh, one other crazy thing about kangaroo babies. So as there's a little baby attached to the mom's nipple and she's nursing that and it's growing into a bigger baby, she may also have an older baby that's still coming in and out of the pouch and nursing. And she's capable of producing 2 different kinds of milk to feed those 2 babies at different life stages, which I find is very, very interesting. And pretty impressive ability for her body to be able to create different levels of nutrients for the babies at different times of their development. In addition to that, kangaroos are one of the animals where it's really well documented that they can do something pretty strange called embryonic diapause. What that means is right after they breed, the sperm cell and the egg cell unite to create a little baby animal. That's sometimes called a zygote. Those little babies start to develop and the cells start to divide, and it gets a little bigger. And then, especially if she's experiencing stressful environmental factors, she can kind of push a pause button on the pregnancy and say like, oh, there's not a lot of food, there was just a big fire in this area, or I got separated from my group and I'm alone and I'm stressed. She can kind of pause the pregnancy, and that pause in some species can exist for 11 months until that little baby that's just kind of a couple cells big can start to form and grow into the bigger baby that's the size of a jelly bean. So that's called embryonic diapause. I'll maybe post some more information later today if you want to learn more about it. But it's a really fascinating thing that kangaroos and some other animals can do. But it's well documented in the kangaroo group of animals. So one thing that I like to talk about with all the animals in the critter chats is the threats they face and their conservation status. And I'm very happy to report that most species of kangaroos, wallaroos, and wallabies are all at very stable conditions right now. Some of them are actually increasing in population, and the IUCN, the International Union of Concerned Scientists, who kind of rank the level of endangerment for animals, has listed most species of kangaroos and wallabies as least concern. So that means their populations are doing really well. They are not threatened with being endangered. However, there's always some exceptions. So there are a couple that are listed as vulnerable or near threatened. One of those is a species that I've had a chance to work with when I worked at the Los Angeles Zoo, and it's the middle picture of the pictures I posted earlier today, and that one is called a yellow-footed rock wallaby. They are listed as near threatened. They live in kind of rocky outcropping areas in kind of southern Australia and kind of a little bit more inland along the eastern coast in Queensland and I forget the other state, New South Wales and Queensland. So they are a little further inland, kind of in some of the drier habitat. But they're super cute animals. They have really amazing looking tails. With the rock wallabies, they cannot use their tail to help them balance like some of those others can. They use their tail more as kind of a stabilizer as they jump, but they can't put weight on it like some of the others. Kangaroos have been clocked at moving about 30 miles per hour for some of the big species, and single bound between when their feet touch the ground to when their feet touch the ground again on the red kangaroos and the eastern gray kangaroos can be between 20 and 30 feet. So they're capable of making a big hop when they're going their full speed. The females are a bit faster than the males because they're also a bit smaller, and they're able to move a little bit better through some of their habitat. My experience in working with kangaroos or seeing kangaroos in the wild, I have been to Australia, and during my time there, I was very excited to see some eastern gray kangaroos out in the wild as we were driving up the eastern side of Australia from Sydney to Brisbane. We saw some kangaroos a couple different times along that drive, and I was super thrilled to see them out in the wild. It was kind of late afternoon, so they were just waking up. Oh, we didn't talk about that. We'll come back to that. They were just waking up and starting to go about their day, so they were gathered under a large tree in some shade, and we're just starting to move around and hop around a bit. We didn't get too close to them because we didn't want to scare them off, but we watched them safely from our car and had a really great time doing that. I have experienced seeing kangaroos in multiple zoos and across America, as well as in one in Australia. And at the one in Australia, you could walk right in with the kangaroos, and for like $1 you could buy some food and feed them. I may post a photo or two of me doing that later on today. It was super fun to feed them from your hand. They're super gentle in the zoo setting, but if they were excited for the food, they would sometimes use their hands to pull your hand closer to them to get some food. During my zoo career, I have worked with several different species of kangaroos and wallabies. When I worked at the Phoenix Zoo, we had a exhibit there called the Wallaby Walkabout, where guests could walk into an exhibit where wallabies also could be in the same place. There was a little divider between the path where people had to stay, and the wallabies could go beyond that into a grassy area. The wallabies very rarely came over to where the people were, but it was still super cute to work with them. Those were called Bennets or red-necked wallabies. They're a good-sized wallaby, probably standing close to 3 feet tall, weighing about 45 to 60 pounds. Super cute to work with them. They were a little skittish around people, but as they got to know me a bit, they would take food out of my hand, which was very fun. During my time at the Los Angeles Zoo, during the time I was training to be a zookeeper, I worked multiple times with the western gray kangaroos that the LA Zoo houses, as well as yellow-footed rock wallabies and a smaller species of wallaby called a Tamar wallaby. Those were all super great to work with. The kangaroos were probably the friendliest of those species. The yellow-footed rock wallabies were tolerant of people, and the Tamar wallabies were usually pretty scared of people and hopped away quite quickly. But they are great animals to work with, super fun and super cute, especially the babies that are called joeys. Once they start coming out of the pouch, they're very adorable. They have very soft fur, especially as babies, and sometimes they'll let you touch them once they get to know you and understand you're not going to hurt them at all. So I wanted to circle back that kangaroos and wallabies are mostly crepuscular. We've talked about that word before a couple times on Critter Chat. That is an animal who is most active early in the morning, right around sunrise. Then they take a nice nap during the middle of the day when it's hot, and then they wake up again right before sunset, and they're active again kind of for several hours before sunset and several hours after once it's dark. And then they'll sometimes sleep during the night as well. Some species of kangaroos and wallabies, especially during the Australian summer when it's hottest, switch to being fully nocturnal and only move around during the night. So depending on the weather where they live, they kind of coordinate that with their activity level. Here in Los Angeles, today it's in the 90s, so I'm thinking that this crepuscular lifestyle is something I should adopt. While it's hot during the middle of the day, I should go take a nap, and then I could get up earlier in the morning and catch those nice cooler morning temperatures to do things like yard work and chores and stuff, instead of trying to do them in the heat of the day. So it's something I'm going to try to learn from the animals and see if I can implement it in my life. I hope you've enjoyed what I've shared with you today about kangaroos, wallaroos, and wallabies. And I hope that you found it interesting and maybe some insight and some fun. I'll be posting some other things up later today on Facebook and possibly some more photos on Instagram. So look for those. And as always, like, follow, share, and subscribe across all channels. And you can also find any of my information at jeremythezoonerd.com, my new website that I just launched. So take a peek at that as well. And until tomorrow, enjoy, have fun, be careful, be safe, and have fun. We'll see you tomorrow. Bye.